All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Anna Schell. I am the Dean of Students at Pacific Preparatory. And for those of you who are less familiar with our school, we're a one-on-one K-12 private school. And today we're going to be talking about how we can help our kids stay organized and help them foster independence as they kind of are contending with this new digital learning environment, as we all are. And first I'm gonna dive into a couple of housekeeping details. So just so you know, we're gonna send everyone a recording of this presentation. I will also be sending you some resources, so don't worry about taking notes. And thank you all for your great questions in the sign-up form. We're going to try and address some of these in the presentation, and then we'll also try and address some of them in the Q&A as well. If for some reason we don't answer the questions that you asked about, feel free to ask them in the Q&A. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, I believe, so please add your questions here during the presentation. We'll do our best to answer as many of those as possible. And if you have follow-up questions, you can always contact us directly. And let's see. So before we get started with the Q&A, I wanted to do a quick survey of who's with us here today. And I'm going to have to actually stop sharing my screen here in order to do that. I'm going to put up a quick poll, and that's going to help us sort of direct our information more appropriately. So let me add this here. I'm going to launch this. And the question here is just, what's the grade level range of the student or students that you're supporting? And so if you can just fill that out, and that'll kind of give us a rough idea of who's here, that would be great. So I'll give you another little bit. This is great. Thanks, everybody. Okay, I'll give you one more minute. All right, good. So I'm going to share the results here. Looks like we have some pre-K to 5, some kind of a good mix. Some pre-K to 5, some 6-8, and some high school. So that's great because we are going to be addressing all of those grade levels here. So I'm going to close this, and then I'm going to share my screen again. Let's see. Do this one. All right. So hopefully everyone can see that. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide here. So today you'll be hearing from me, Anna Schell. Again, I'm the Dean of Students at Pacific Preparatory. I've been helping support families with in-home learning for almost 10 years now. You'll also be hearing from Jesse Roseland. He's our head of school. Jesse's been working in education for over 20 years. He's really, I think, go-to guy for efficiency and tech. He is always seeking new ways to help kids become more self-sufficient with the help of technology, and he'll speak to that a little bit today. Our guest collaborator today is Leslie Martin. We're so thrilled that Leslie is joining us today for this presentation. Leslie has worked both in the classroom as a social studies teacher and also one-on-one as an academic coach, focused on teaching teens organizational, time management, and executive functioning skills. She's authored a couple books. One is called Make the Grade, and the other is Where's My Stuff? The Ultimate Teen Organizing Guide. And her company called Class Tracker sells planners for students that are specifically designed based on her experience in supporting kids with organization. So thanks, Leslie, for joining us today. On the agenda, so we're gonna start, Jesse and I are going to begin by addressing some of the younger age kids and how we can help them stay organized and on top of their assignments. And then Leslie is going to provide some tips and ideas for parents with kids in grades more in the sort of 6 to 12 range. And then we'll wrap with some key takeaways, and we're going to leave plenty of time for the Q&A at the end. So we're going to start around how to keep our younger age kids organized in the digital learning world. And, you know, as far as goals for the K-5 age group. So first and foremost, I think with these kids, with all kids, we want to help them develop independence and be their own best self-advocates. But I think with the younger age students, they need a little bit of structure around that. So helping them develop that independence so they can, you know, navigate through their digital classes and their digital classwork independently. And for working parents, of course, this is especially important right now because we might not have as much time or bandwidth to provide that oversight for their online classes. So we'll get to that circumstance. Jesse will address that specifically a little later on. So second, with the younger age group, we want to ease their transitions from one class or activity to the next and avoid meltdowns and resistance as much as possible. And sometimes it's just inevitable and we have to forgive ourselves. But I think, you know, we want to at least try and sort of set everyone up for success. And then third, we want to ensure that the kids are completing and submitting all the work that they need to get done. So I'm going to pass the presentation along to Jesse, and he's going to provide you with some ideas about how to pursue these goals.
Thank you, Anna. So as Anna mentioned, I'm Jesse, head of school at Pacific Preparatory. I've been doing this for 20 years. And I also have 3 children. I have a 3rd grader, a kindergartner, and a preschooler. So a lot of what I'm doing is actually trying things out with my own family to make sure that things are working. If we're trying new tech things, I'm using my kids as guinea pigs to see, you know, whether these things work. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And that's why I think it's important to like literally try these things out before recommending them. So everything that I'm recommending here, I've actually, you know, tried out on my own and seen it in practice. So what I'd like to talk about first is this idea of fostering independence. And I think this is very challenging in this pandemic period where, you know, the kids are in this new environment with Zoom, and a lot of it is like some of the kids can be a little bit clingy, or there's a little bit of a regression so that they really want to rely on the parents to do everything. And I find this very challenging because I want the kids to be independent. And that's what we do at TutorCore. That's what we do at Pacific Preparatory, is really trying to encourage that independence. Now, a lot of what we're doing here is we're trying to build new habits and routines. So give the kids the tools that they need and then help them over time develop these new habits. So instead of doing everything for them, like turning on the computer and logging into Zoom, show the kids how to do this themselves. I think that's really important. And then give them the tools. You actually print hard copies of the login and password information along with the daily schedule so that you can have that. You might post it on the wall or something like that. You can also use digital calendars, like you can actually create the Google calendars and have the Zoom links in there. I'm gonna pause for 1 second. Anna, can you hear this background noise?
I don't hear, it's okay for me.
Okay, good. It's like 85 degrees, so I have the windows open, and of course, like the UPS truck is here, and we got a weed whacker going on, got someone cutting down a tree. It's just, you know, of course, this is what happens when we're on a Zoom webinar. But let me get back to it with the slides. So the other thing is like redundancy. Like really help your kids, like empower them by having schedules and calendars all over the place. You can have them, you know, tape them to the wall or to the desk next to where their laptop or desktop is. You can have something else, another calendar printed out over in the kitchen or in another spot in the house where the kids go. I've tried different things like having an iPad with Google Calendar up so the kids can come and check the calendar themselves. So that works. Another thing that is really helpful that I've experimented with is we have an Alexa. Oh, now that I'm saying it, she's going to start talking to me. But we use Alexa to set up reminders. So we say, oh, okay, at 10:30 every day, Charlotte has a break, and then at 10:45, she needs to go back to class. So at 10:42, Monday through Friday, we have an alert that comes on that says, Charlotte's class starts in 2 minutes. And so again, this is the sort of thing that takes the burden off of us as the parents. Next slide. Okay, so the other thing is, what I've experienced is a lot of the kids get stuck and then they come quickly to the parents. And this is difficult, like my wife and I both work. And so we have to sort of establish some boundaries around that to help get the kids to develop perseverance. So some things we do is we say like, well, try 3 times, ask the teacher. Like there's a lot of reticence sometimes to just ask the teacher, but you know, you can really focus on like the kids can chat with the teacher via Zoom. They can ask these questions. The teachers, that's a key thing. It's like, just ask the teacher. The other thing is having office hours for parents like us, so the kids know, oh, between 11:30 and 12, I can come and ask mom or come and ask dad. We can, you know, have a space for breaks. The other thing is, I think as adults, we sometimes forget that we don't have to eat as much as kids do. And so, you know, my wife will often just like forget to have lunch, or, you know, it just is not as important. But when the kids are at school, they have snacks like every 2 hours, like all the time. It's like, oh, they have snack at 10:30, they have lunch at 11:30, they have another snack after school at 2:30. I mean, there's a constant support there. So making sure that you have easy snacks for them in the fridge where they can reach them. So if you have younger kids, you need to put those snacks on the first shelf of the fridge so that the kids can go and get that yogurt and then get it for themselves. If you have older high school kids, obviously they're like 6 feet tall, so they can reach wherever. So that's not a problem. Okay, these signs, we got these do not disturb signs so that the kids can know when we're working, when they can and cannot come in. They're kind of cute. We got an Amazon link here. So we have please do not disturb, like, you know, if my wife's seeing patients, she puts on the please do not disturb, or if I'm on this webinar right now, I have a please do not disturb on the door. So if the kids come up, you know, they just know right there, they see that sign. And that this does require you to flip it back and forth. I think that's something we can all deal with. Another thing for the slightly older kids is you can set up text messaging. So they don't need a phone. You can set up text messaging on an iPad. You can set up messaging via Gmail chat features so that they don't always have to come knock on the door or interrupt you. They can actually type. And this is also encouraging good communication, typing skills, literacy, you know, sneaky learning. Okay, so I can't say this for everyone. This is not universal. We're all in different schools, public schools, private schools. Every school is a little bit different. Some are using Google Classroom, some are not, some are using Seesaw, Clever, Epic, all these different things. So all I can say is you do need to know your school systems and take a little bit time to get comfortable with how they work, how the alerts work, how you can find out what the assignments are, things like that. Overall, just really try and simplify things. So I mean, one of the things I notice, which just, it's so overwhelming, you know, Anna and I were talking, we sometimes get 5 emails a day from school. You know, if you have 2 or 3 kids, you're getting emails from 3 or 4 or 5 different teachers, from administrators, from principals. It's like, oh my God, email overload. So some things you can do is set up an email filter for yourself or set up folders and just like put all those emails into one folder, and then once a day or every other day you review those so that things don't get lost. Finally, if you do kind of lose track of things and you want to know if your kid got all their information in, you can just email the teacher, like a 2-sentence email saying, hope you're doing well. Just wanted to see if Joey got all of his assignments in this week. It takes like 1 minute, and then you've kind of covered it, even if you've lost track of overall, maybe the day-to-day in the week. Finally, just having like a help box. So if the kids do need help with some piece, like maybe there's a particular assignment they need help with, you could have a little physical box, especially for the younger kids, or you could have like a digital folder on their desktop where they could move things. Okay, well, this is a nice picture for the younger kids. Let's say you have a kindergartner, 1st grade, 2nd grade. You have a lot of these manipulatives, and some schools are providing this, some are not. But if you can have a little box like this where they have all the tools that they need readily accessible, that makes them more independent, and it helps them learn to do things on their own. And I think that's one of the silver linings in this pandemic, is that kids really are learning some of that independence. When the kids are older, I think it changes to making sure they might have like their TI calculator, they have, you know, the materials they need, the pens, pencils, whatever, just like maybe just the textbooks they need, but having all those materials right near the desk or the workspace. Okay, so accountability. A lot of this is important because sometimes the students will actually do the work, but then they won't get it in. So you need to know like what the tasks are, when they're due, how do you confirm that they're done, and how do you submit them? And there are all these different avenues now for submitting it. You might submit it via Google Classroom, you might email it, you might still go to the school, like some of us are going to the school to physically drop off stuff. All these different things, but just really figuring out what really needs to be completed. And going back to what I said previously, if you lose track of it, the teachers are always there to help. So you can just email the teacher and say, you know, did my kid get everything in this week? Or better yet, have the kid email the teacher and say, hey, I just want to make sure I got everything in. And again, that's teaching them to communicate with the teachers, that the teachers are their allies. Another thing is like having these daily check-ins before and after school. I know it takes a little bit of extra time, but if you can just check in, sit down with your child for 5 minutes and establish like a daily routine just to make sure that they've gone through anything, I think that 5 minutes is going to be worth so much down the road, because you're establishing that behavior that every day you're just doing a quick check-in. You're not letting things build up. Finally, just know that it does take a village. We do rely on outside support, whether it's tutors or teachers or grandparents or other folks that are helping out to support your family to make this all doable. Now I'd like to turn it over to Leslie. Leslie's going to talk about the older kids.
Thank you. Let's go back a slide. No, that's fine. We can leave this one up. That's great. Yes, perfect. So as Jesse introduced me, I'm Leslie Martin. I am the founder of Class Tracker. My company makes academic planners for middle school, high school, and college students. I also am an academic coach, and I've been working with students now, including my time in the classroom, for over 20 years. And in fact, I've been working with students virtually using Zoom before it was a thing. So I kind of consider myself a bit of a founder in that aspect. So I want to focus today on helping middle school and high school kids. And really the focus becomes more about working independently and taking ownership of their own learning, this notion of self-regulation. That said, students in the 6th grade will definitely need more help and support than those in the 11th grade with some of these distance learning strategies. So in this section, what we're going to cover is setting up a space for learning, 3 steps for academic success, and we'll end with some tips to communicate tools, to manage some communication tools during this distance learning section. Or time in our lives. All right, next slide. Perfect. So as Jesse discussed, having a space for learning, and he had some ideas, and I'm going to add on to that, is really key for students of any grade. And when it comes to middle and high schoolers, there are a few things that I recommend. The first is that they really should do school at a desk or table. Beds may be popular and convenient, but they're really not conducive to learning. The other thing is to make sure the workspace has room for school supplies, as well as a space for textbooks or to take notes. I saw this one TikTok video where a mom had bought actually some cubicles and set them up in the dining room on the dining room table. So that is sort of one level of extreme, but this notion that everyone has their space. And then if you haven't already, you really want to set your kids up with a headset. It's way easier for them to focus, and it's less distracting for everyone else around them. So once they have this space that's set up, I want to sort of talk about some tips for staying focused and distraction-free while they're in school. And I just want to name it. Zoom calls are exhausting, and I appreciate the fact that you all are here. I'm sure many of you are on them all day long. But there are some tips that I want to share with you for how your students, and maybe you as well, can stay more focused and energized when you're spending time in front of screens. The number one trick is, or tip I should say, is do not multitask. And this is because it's way more taxing on your brain to pay attention to more than one thing at a time. And there might be some hesitation or some some pushback on this from the kids, but the two things that I do, or I suggest to the students I work with, is one is to move their phone to another room or put it on airplane and do not disturb mode. And the second is to close all the tabs except for those needed for the classes that they're attending. And this will help them find sort of where they need to be faster and also limit the temptation to focus on something other than what's happening in class. The second is blink more. I know this sounds weird, but when we are in front of screens, we actually tend to blink less, which actually dries your eyes out, which makes your eyes more tired. So it's hard to remember to do that, but if one can do that, that's great. And the other thing is I actually now have put eye drops right next to my computer, and I sort of give my eyes a little eye drop massage a few times a day, and that really helps me my eyes stay fresh. The third tip is to hide self-view. And this is different from not showing your video at all. And we can go into how to do this perhaps in the Q&A. But what this does is it allows the person on the Zoom call to not see themselves and only be able to focus on the speaker. It's actually very exhausting to look at ourselves all day long. And so taking that element away is really helpful. And then my last tip for staying energized and focused during meetings is to stand up and move or stretch, either in between classes or during breaks. Some people even suggest sort of setting a timer for every 20 minutes to stand up and stretch. Again, we're sitting for a lot of time. It's hard to stay focused and energized when you do that. And one last tip that I want to say in terms of focus, time management, is using something called the Pomodoro method. And this is more for when you're doing schoolwork, not necessarily being in class. And if we have time during the Q&A, I can describe it further, but if not, Google it, Pomodoro method, and it's a great way for students to keep their focus over long stretches of study time. All right, next slide, please. So based on the work I've done with kids for the last 20 or so years, there are three things that stand out that make students sort of successful in school and in life. Is they do three things well. One, they know what they need to do and by when it needs to be done. And this is something that Jessie talked about. They make a plan to get it done and they actually do it. And the third is they turn their work in on time in the correct way. And normally when students are struggling in school, it's often because there's a breakdown in one or more of these steps. So it could be that they don't know what to do, or they don't know where to find out what they need to do, and so therefore they don't do it, etc. That said, even the most successful students are finding that distance learning creates challenges in each of these elements. So you can imagine for students who struggle with executive function, distance learning can be especially hard. So we're going to break it down piece by piece, and I'm going to offer a couple suggestions for each of these areas. Number one, oh no, we're gonna go back. We're gonna stay on the slide for a while. Sorry. So let's talk about knowing what needs to get done and by when. I'm a big fan of writing down all assignments in a planner so that students can see everything in one place. This allows students to see what days are heavier or when they have big assignments are due. This also becomes a place where they can track what work has been completed and what still needs to be done, and I'll get to that in a little bit more in depth. And while online platforms have some views that help students see their assignments, oftentimes they have to jump from one tab to another to get their entire picture. And so writing things in a planner is really an easy, screen-free way to track everything in one place. And when I'm working with students one-on-one, one of the things I like to do is to brainstorm all the different places where assignments can be shared. So whether it's the learning management system, the LMSs, or if it's email, or if it's class, or a friend. And then what I do is I like to explore the different views of those learning platforms so that my clients can see all the ways in which assignments are posted. And there are a ton of YouTube videos out there that can teach you and your student ways to navigate these different platforms. And it's worth spending a little time mastering these interfaces, as Jessie mentioned, because they often have some really cool features that are really helpful, but not always obvious. So now I've got a great list. We need to turn that list into a plan. And basically, really, students need to determine when and how they're going to do their work on any given night. And that plan can be as complex as noting down timeframes for each and every assignment and breaking them into smaller pieces, or it can be as simple as starring the assignments that they're going to work on any given night. The most important thing is that there is a moment every day or a few moments every day where your student just kind of looks at their workload, look at what's coming up and says, okay, what do I need to do and by when? This is also the time where they might review some assignments to figure out just how big or small they are and to try and figure out if they might need some help getting them done. And finally, in distance learning, I'm really encouraging students to complete their work as early as they can so they can take advantage of getting help from their teachers either during class, after class, or during office hours. And in my work with students this year, I actually am seeing sort of fewer out of class assignments than what was assigned before the pandemic, which does give students a little bit more time to get them done in advance of their next class. So they've made the plan. They've got the list, they've made the plan, they've done the work, now turning it in. And one might think that with an online system that turning work in could be easy, but actually I'm finding that many students are struggling with this last step. And I'm seeing it in a few ways, that oftentimes that they will start an assignment in class, they may get most of it done, but maybe have a couple of things to finish. They forget about doing it, and then they forget to press submit, and they get no credit for the work that they did because they forgot to submit it. Or they complete their assignments, but forget to submit them. And then there's a third thing, which some assignments are done offline, and the student has to upload the proof that the work was done, and sometimes they forget to do that, and so then they don't get credit. So this can be all super frustrating for kids and for families because they're like, but I did the work and then I didn't turn it in and they have deadlines. So, so it's really kind of, I really try and help kids learn ways in which they can sort of regulate and manage this. And there are some somewhat complicated systems of checks and balances that many students don't use or know exist. There are online grading portals that are separate but sometimes tied to the learning management systems. And keeping track of late or missing assignments does require some digging that students either don't know how to do or don't want to do. But this is where paper comes in and can be super helpful because the student can easily flip back and forth between weeks to see what they wrote down, but maybe didn't cross out or check off. And I also encourage students to check their classes daily to make sure that they have no missing assignments for the day or week. And this extra step does require some habit formation and some practice. And this is where sometimes parents can help out with this, but once they get a hang of it, it's super helpful and really, really empowering. Next slide. So with distance learning, students are being asked to master some new forms of communication tools, specifically email. And I'm guessing that if you have middle or high school, you know that they're notoriously bad at checking their email. And on top of that, Jessie alluded to this, their inboxes are flooded daily with these automated announcements from each of their classes and the school. And so those automated announcements are oftentimes redundant to what's in their learning management systems, and they end up just flooding the email boxes. And so the actual important messages, which may be a grade update, a communication from a teacher, a response to a note that the student left on one of, asking for some help, gets lost. So what I recommend doing is actually a daily email purge, or maybe an every other day email purge. And that is, and there's a quick trick that I've just been working on with my students, and that is you go to your email box in the Google inbox and you search for the phrase that starts out the automated message. So it could be new assignment : and when you search for those, you see all of them. The student can select them all and delete them, because that information is already in their learning management system. They don't need to see it. So you go through all of those things. And then what happens is this email that might have had hundreds and hundreds of emails in it becomes smaller. Maybe you see 5 or 10, and then students can really focus on those important emails and get back to their teachers, etc. The other thing, again, I'm just reiterating a lot of what Jessie said, but is to really learn the learning management system. There are some videos that you can look up, as I said earlier, but there are some specific things that I recommend learning, and that is to understand where there might be cases where kids can see a calendar view or a task list or a to-do list for all of their classes. Oftentimes, things are divided by classes, so students only see one class at a time. But if there are views and ways that students can see all classes at a time, it's super helpful then for them to get that complete picture of what's going on for them. So that is it. That's my section is done. I'm passing it back to Anna and Jessie.
All right. Thank you so much, Leslie. Okay. So just some takeaways here. You know, I think it takes a little bit more energy to plan ahead and put some of these systems in place. But, you know, I think for all grade levels, all ages, the more you kind of sit down and help your kids understand and walk through some of the systems ahead of time and help them build those habits, the less work you're going to have to do later. So that's a big piece. And then identifying potential distractors or organizational barriers and helping kind of remove those, at least the top ones. Designating some sort of central hub for deadlines or assignments, whether that's in your LMS or whether that's something that's separate of the LMS. Obviously, you don't want to do too much sort of, again, like redundancy, but you know, if a student is really good with using paper planners, then you want to make sure that that's the hub, that's where everything is going. And then what Leslie was talking about, knowing, helping the students understand what's due when, how to do it, and how they're going to turn it in. And then really, like, again, the main message, I think the main takeaway from this is helping our kids become their own best advocates and helping teach them self-advocacy so that they can start problem solving and understanding what's going to work best for them. So before we get into the Q&A, we're just going to do a couple quick plugs. So just a little bit more about how we support families. Pacific Preparatory, we have Pacific Preparatory is our one-on-one school. We provide K-12 one-on-one schooling for students. We also provide academic tutoring through TutorCore, and we're doing remote tutoring right now. We do standardized test prep as well. If you are feeling way too strapped to do sort of those morning check-ins, or if you want study skills support, you know, something that would be more of a, you know, shorter check-in so that we can help kids kind of get into good habits, we're happy to provide instructors who are trained with those skills to come help do that. And then Leslie, maybe you can also just give a quick plug for Class Tracker.
Yeah, sure. So Class Tracker, we make academic planners, as I mentioned, for high school, college, and college students and middle school students. There's actually a free downloadable middle school planner in there. And those planners were created by the work that I did working side by side with students for multiple years to try and figure out what systems they needed and what structures they needed to help them think about their weeks. And I also am an academic success coach and work privately with students. My specialty is definitely the older kids. I would say I probably 8th grade and up, 8th grade, high school and college.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to stop sharing my screen as we move into the Q&A. And I apologize if people have been asking questions here. Oh, good. Jesse's been addressing this. I haven't been able to see it as I was sharing my screen. So let's see, I'm just gonna start with, I don't see any open questions here now. If anyone has any questions to add to the Q&A, please go ahead and add those. I'm going to, let's see, actually Marie has a question here. I'm gonna ask this one. Let's see, oh, this one is addressing motivation. This is great. Can you address some tricks to convince older students to actually be motivated or get organized rather than jumping into their desire to play video games or online games? Yeah, this is tricky. And it's so readily available because it's like they're already on the computer and the video games are right there. Leslie, do you have any thoughts about this one?
Yeah, this is a tricky one. And I think that one of the things that's especially difficult is being a parent of it's hard as a parent to have those conversations. This is why people hire me. And I'm not suggesting that, but I just know that that is a difficult thing. I think one of the things that the conversations that I have with my clients is this notion of how when you do your work on time, the class is way more interesting and way more engaging than if you are not doing your work. And that sitting through those multiple hours of classes any day of the week can be exhausting and boring if you don't know what's going on. So sort of being, able to participate and understand, I think for some students actually makes them feel better and is somewhat motivating. And then the video online, yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I don't have they're very, very, they've been designed, unfortunately, to be very attractive to teenage kids. And so you're fighting against that. But I guess maybe one suggestion I would ask is to perhaps ask them what their goals are for school and what they want to get out of it, and maybe frame the conversation around that and asking them maybe even how much time they think is appropriate to spend on video games. So I think as kids get older, one of the things is they do have to develop this self-regulation, their ability to, control their thoughts, feelings, and actions. And so as we move away from doing that for our younger kids, we need to sort of ask the kids to think about and make decisions about those things.
And I would just add that, I really liked what Leslie said about getting the kids involved in the process of deciding, okay, how much time is reasonable for me to be spending on video games or online games? And then ideally switch it so it's like an extrinsic reward. So rather than it being an assumption that they get to play those games, it's like, if I get this work done, and maybe it's not getting all the work done, maybe it's if I spend 30 minutes doing this. So it's not like, oh my God, it's overwhelming, I don't know how much time it's gonna take. It's like, no, you're just gonna spend 30 minutes on this. If you're not done, then we can finish it up at another time. But if you do this 30 minutes, then you get to play the games for 30 minutes. I'm reminding myself of like working out. Like, I don't really like working out on the elliptical, but I kind of get to watch a show on my iPad when I do it. So it's like, oh, well, I'm going to work out on my elliptical and I get to watch a show. And then all of a sudden it becomes this habit, this routine, where then I actually look forward and I want to work out because I have this like positive association with it. Also the health benefits, of course. But that kind of thing of like turning it around into this like normalizing, so they have to do A and then they do B. Just like you brush your teeth before you go to bed. Like that, this just becomes a natural process of things.
Yeah, I was gonna add that as well. And I think oftentimes a lack of motivation to do schoolwork comes from either feeling overwhelmed, like they don't know where to start, or feeling like they don't know how to do something, or they're not feeling confident in the subject. And of course, like video games are the easy alternative to not having to face those obstacles. And so sometimes it's a matter of helping the student also understand how to get started on something, and whether it's you or whether that's with a tutor or whether that's just sort of like helping them understand where to start. Okay, the first step is open your notebook. Okay, the second step is let's write down 3 things that you have to get done in the next 30 minutes. Just write it down, like whether that's in Leslie's, planner or on a whiteboard or something. Okay, and then set the timer 30 minutes. Okay, I'm going to try and complete these 3 things. And then like Jesse said, then you get the reward of the video games. But yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of helping to understand, oh, let's just talk through how to get started so you're not feeling overwhelmed. Great question. I think motivation is a question that's on everyone's mind right now. Maybe Leslie, you could, one thing I wanted to ask, so someone asked in the question in the sign up form about tools for blocking distracting websites during class time. Do either of you have recommendations for this? I think this is a hard one because I think this is something a lot of parents are struggling with, about this sort of, again, multitasking, the kids who are trying to pay attention to class, and then here's this other thing that they're also looking at.
I don't have any specific recommendations for apps or software. There's so many out there, and some come through your service provider like Comcast, or through, if you're accessing via your phone, you could get it through Verizon. Some are via Google Chrome add-ons. So there are a whole bunch of different tools, but I think it is smart to be safe, and they can not only limit, they can control screen time, but they can also be, just having safe browsing. So for adult content, limiting access, things like that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's a lot, there's like some very extensive packages that you can buy that I know exist out there that will, let you have a lot of control over what is being accessed on certain devices. Or like Jesse said, you can do it kind of by browser, or you can get plugins or whatever, or by like I know YouTube, you can like limit what kids are accessing specifically to YouTube. But I think for a lot of, especially the older kids, know all the loopholes, so it might be worth the investment to get something a little bit more comprehensive. Okay, one other question I'm going to ask to Leslie, and then we'll wrap up, is can you just tell us a little bit more about the Pomodoro method? And I think it is that actually goes nicely hand in hand with the idea of sort of helping motivate kids.
Yeah, for sure. So the Pomodoro method, it was named after the Pomodoro tomato, because I guess there are these tomato timers, like egg timers, but they're tomatoes. And the idea is that students work in these for a certain amount of time, they take a break, and then they go back to work. And the concept here is that the brain is a muscle. And I always use the example that, like, if I asked someone to do 100 push-ups, could they do it all at once? No. But if I said, could you do 10 push-ups, take a break, do 10 more, take a break over the course of the day, could you do 100? Yes. So just as the body has different muscles, the brain has muscles. And so the brain gets tired. And I think if what happens a lot of times is kids tend to say, I'm going to just do all my work, and they get really, really tired. And so the Pomodoro method allows the brain, it builds in automatic breaks for the brain. So the way it works is that you set it up with in a distraction-free zone. In other words, you're going to say, okay, I'm going to work on work. I'm going to have a list of what I need to get done. And I'm going to set a timer for 25 minutes. And so you set the timer for 25 minutes, and you and you work for 25 minutes. And then after that, you take a 5-minute break. Now, a couple things about 25 minutes. Number one, it's not that much time. So this goes back to what Jesse was saying about the show. It's like whenever I say, hey, can you just do that math assignment? Why don't you just spend 25 minutes working on it? You don't have to get the whole thing done, just 25 minutes. And oftentimes what students realize is the starting part is the hardest. And so once you get that going, then actually, even if you take a 5-minute break, going back to it isn't nearly as difficult. So it has that benefit of sort of helping bust procrastination, because you're like, just 25 minutes, that's not that much. So that's sort of the premise of it. The other thing is it starts to help on a more sophisticated way. It starts to help people understand time and the passage of time. They're like, oh, wow, I thought this paper was going to take me 3 hours, but it's actually only taking 2 hours because I spent 4 Pomodoros on it. So it's this way to kind of mark and understand time, so that as students get older, they go off to college, they need to manage their time even more. They understand how long it takes to do something. So it's really great for managing time, staying focused, and also staying motivated. The one thing I will say is about the 5-minute breaks is they really ought to be screen-free. Kids are spending way too much time in front of screens. They should use I recommend that they use the breaks for getting some water, getting a snack. I'm a big crazy dog person. I'm like, love your dog for 5 minutes, dance to your favorite dance, do some mindfulness for 5 minutes or 3 minutes, or just breathe. But anything to kind of get yourself to step away, especially given that kids are spending so much time on screens. So it's really like this action-packed tool. And again, it's not hard and fast. It doesn't have to be 25 minutes. For the littles, maybe you do 15 minutes. And, you know, and some people do like 45. I kind of like to stay in that 25 range or 30 range, but you play around with it to see what works.
Just one thing to add to Leslie's comments there is the Pomodoro method links in with this idea of the primacy and the recency effect for memory and retention. So, you know, some kids will say, oh, I studied 3 hours for the American history test. Well, you really remember most the 5 minutes that you first spent studying and the last 5 minutes that you spent studying. So having all this information, all this time in between for 2 hours and 50 minutes is less important in terms of memory retention. So it's really, you have smaller amounts of time, more frequently, you're going to remember more information.
And one more thing is for especially kids with, I work with kids who have ADHD or ADD or issues with focus. It's actually really helpful for them, because the thought of having to sit down for a really long time and try and stay focused on one thing is super hard. And one of the tricks that I also tell kids who have issues with distractibility is to have a little notebook next to you while you're working. So while you're doing your 25 minutes, that if something distracts you and like, oh, I need to think about this, I say, just write it down. And you can get to it later, but that notion of writing it down helps kind of like take away some of this desire or attraction at looking at that distraction nugget, and allows you to kind of leave it and go back to your work. So yeah, and for those kids, I definitely say 25 is too long. Start with 15. Take a break. Do another 15. It's just a way so that they can have some success.
Great. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I'm going to wrap it up. And I want to say a huge thank you to both Leslie and to Jesse for your time and really helpful tips, helpful ideas. And thanks to everyone for joining and adding more screen time to your lives, your busy lives. We're going to send you a link to the recording, and we'll also send you a couple of resources as well, so you can have those in your inbox. So thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your Wednesday.